Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this engagement of Vision 2030. I'm joined in the room by my colleagues, DVC Lange, DVC Ferris, DVC Sue Harrison, and our COO, Dr. Reno Morar. We hope today to have an engagement with you on what I call our proposed Vision 2030. UCT Strategic Framework 2020 comes to an end in December this year, and that strategic framework has served us very well. But we all know that it was developed during a time of unrest, and all of that is reflected in the document. It focuses on addressing our current challenges, many of which are also important as we consider our future. However, developing an institutional strategy with the future in mind brings into focus new challenges that need addressing as we look towards 2030. The fourth industrial revolution is upon us. We are battling with COVID-19 as well as changing needs for those we serve. So when I took office back in 2018, July, it was at a time when the strategic framework was close to the end, left only with 18 months. And that presented a privilege and an opportunity to bring a new vision to UCT. And at the core of that vision are three pillars: excellence, transformation, and sustainability. Make the argument about the fact that moving into the future, excellence will remain a non-negotiable. We will continue to encourage it, to grow it, and to recognize it. But we will also do that with an understanding that excellence is not benign, it is not innocent, and it is enabled. So the way in which it shows up is a reflection of how we have enabled it. So looking into the future, we have to enable excellence differently. And that's where the pillar of transformation comes in. And with the pillar of transformation, we want to understand the breadth and the depth of transformation. That is not just about employment equity and access to UCT for students. We say that is important because it brings the critical mass, but it is not sufficient for transformation. Our transformation agenda has got to move on to equity of participation and equity of access. And by equity of participation is how do we enable the excellence? Because how we enable the excellence will also give us a different shade when we look at excellence that shows up. It will help us achieve equity of success. And that's how we want to understand, work with transformation. And I call that transformation with integrity. These two pillars, if we do them together as a university, then we will ensure the sustainability of the university. Sustainability in all its forms, in its responsiveness, in its finances, as well as in the sustainability, how we contribute to environmental sustainability. So as we look towards the future, we have to think not just of the problems of the past, even if they still affect us now, but we also have to look beyond our current context because the world is changing. And so as we began thinking about our vision for 2030, we asked ourselves the question, the world is changing, are we? It's for this reason that we set up the Futures think tank to help us think through how we respond to these changes that are happening in the world. However, as we continued in the Futures think tank that was chaired by Professor Alison Lewis, and we call it Think Tank 1.0, chaired by Professor Alison Lewis, as we continued, the focus of the think tank changed from how should we respond to the coming changes to how do we lead the change. And that change came about as a result of saying, but we are a leading university, so we cannot wait for the change to happen. We should lead the change. Change can be disruptive, but it can also enhance what we do. It can make it better. It can make it stand out and make it even more impactful. So to lead the change as UCT, we have to initiate the changes ourselves. Otherwise, we will not be able to enhance what we do. We know what happened to the many leading companies that resisted change when the digital revolution started. In fact, one can say they resisted the digital disruption. There are numerous examples. I often talk about Nokia, Kodak, the AA. There are many that you can point to. As the world changes, leading companies that do not proactively initiate the change themselves run the risk of losing their edge and becoming irrelevant. A few weeks ago, I read that Kodak has repositioned itself after missing the moment of the technological disruption, and they filed for bankruptcy in 2012. They are now reworking or reimagining themselves by working on manufacturing ingredients for COVID-19 drugs. I mean, just think about it. This is Kodak, right? When we grew up, it's the photo people. But here they are. They missed the digital transformation moment, and now they are working hard to make sure that they do not miss the COVID-19 moment. And that's why they're exploring how they can manufacture ingredients for COVID-19 drugs. Vision 2030 is an opportunity to make sure that UCT does not miss the moment, this COVID moment, but also the moment that we have, that it happened at the end of our strategic framework 2020, and we have an opportunity to think about our future for our Vision 2030. Universities operate in environments that are increasingly unstable, environments that are unpredictable and competitive. The COVID-19 pandemic is the latest in a series of disruptive forces that universities have experienced in the past several decades. Digital transformation, demands for lifelong learning, financial crisis, and demands for new forms of knowledge, new forms of skills and competencies are some of the major drivers that have made change and continuous reinvention necessary in order for universities to remain relevant, competent, and sustainable. And digital transformation represents profound advancements in science and technology, and it has important implications for society, governments, businesses, industry, and higher education institutions. So we can't just ignore it. And these advancements, as well as their promises and perils, provide an overarching backdrop for us as a university to reimagine the ongoing transformation of society, the future of work and professions, and the evolving role of universities as knowledge institutions. We therefore want to be proactive, and to do that, we have to initiate the change ourselves and decide for ourselves who we want to be as UCT, and how we are going to distinguish ourselves. With this thinking, we emerged with a proposed vision, #Unleashed. This proposed vision is meant to provoke us first as the leadership, as well as the entire university. Our proposed vision is to be an institution that unleashes human potential for a fair and just future. Our dream is to make a distinct contribution in 4 areas. The first is to provide a holistic, innovative, and future-oriented education. And the second is to conduct research that addresses Africa's problems and contributes to global knowledge. You will know that when you look at our slides, as well as our vision document, we deliberately use K, the letter K, to spell Africa. We do that as a symbolic rejection of colonial usurpation of African agency. In a sense, we are reclaiming African agency, and we are saying this Vision 2030 gives us an opportunity to do that. Our goal 3 is to give thought leadership, and our goal 4 is to inculcate an organizational ethos that supports new and diverse ways of thinking, doing, and being. In crafting these goals, we worked with the notion of an integrated set of choices and of creating sustainable advantage. We asked ourselves the question, what is unique about what UCT can offer? that will sustain the value of the university into the future. The fundamental approach to the development of Vision 2030 is based on the cascading down of strategic choices from the institutional level to the implementation units. In practical terms, this implied thinking strategically about UCT in relation to the core functions of teaching and learning and research, and in relation to the 6 faculties and their departments, and also in relation to the different departments that provide professional and support services for the university. In doing this, transformation and social responsiveness were regarded as cross-cutting elements of our ethos that must be present in all strategic choices at all levels for them to be effective. This is not a trivial decision to see these transformation and social responsiveness as cross-cutting. It will call us to rethink a lot of things. How do we resource these areas of our operation? But also, how do we recognize social responsiveness, for example, when we do ad hominem promotions? Is it still separate, or do we see it as cross-cutting? But what does it mean to see it as cross-cutting when you do ad hominem promotion? These require thinking, and this is what leading the change and allowing ourselves to be unleashed, whether because of the disruption of COVID-19 or because of the changing world that we live in. With this slide, I want to hand over to DVC Ferris. She's going to elaborate on her vision in terms of transformation, and thereafter she will hand over to DVC Lange and then DVC Harris, who will elaborate on our goals that focus on the academic project, and then I will come back with closing remarks with goal 3 and 4, and then hand over to the COO so that he can then talk even more sharply about how the work that we do in operations also cuts across all of the goals, enables everything that we do across the goals. Loretta, over to you.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. Thanks, Katie. So this vision was developed not by the executive. It was developed by a group of people that consisted of staff, past staff, academic staff, and students. And that's how we eventually ended up with the 4 goals. And of course, the core focus as we were developing the vision was to focus on teaching and to focus on research. But as the Vice-Chancellor has just indicated, we always considered that transformation, social responsiveness is embedded in teaching, in research. That has always been the approach of UCT, and that is the approach going forward. But we wanted to think very specifically around how do we see transformation going forward in Vision 2030. So in order to do this bit of thinking, we also asked some students and staff to think with us. And we had a session where we thought about transformation. What does it look like? What do we need to continue to focus on in order to achieve on Vision 2030? And we came up with this massive transformative purpose, which is that as a university, we need to redress inequality. We are deeply aware of the fact that we live in a society that is unequal. And many of our work in social responsiveness, for example, is exactly that, is to address through our work, through our research, through teaching, is to address the inequities that sits within the South African society and beyond. And so we focus on redressing inequality, but also that we want to build social justice. And how do we build social justice? We do that through targeted strategies. And I'll come to this one example, such as target strategy in a minute, to focus on return to dignity and to amplify voice and agency. So in essence, we have 4 transformative principles that inform the vision. And as DVC Lange and DVC Harrison now speaks to teaching and research, you will hear the language of these principles flowing through the vision, because that's in essence what we wanted to achieve, was to kind of come up with the transformative principles for transformation for social responsiveness that we can weave into Vision 2030. And so these would be the core principle. It's about redressing inequality. It's about a return to dignity, because we understand that inequality impacts profoundly on one's own sense of dignity. And therefore we talk about a return to dignity as we focus on inequality. At the same time, we want to ensure that every voice is heard, and this needs to be a collective vision, and we need to collectively implement it. And that means people should feel that they have agency, staff, students, and that we amplify voices through our vision. All of this will lead to social justice. And as I said, one of the strategies that we're currently working on is to conceptualize an approach for racism, which we all know has been haunting us for many years at UCT and still continues to haunt us. And we focus on a couple of core pillars of this anti-racism approach. One is to look at white accountability or white privilege, to start having those conversations around white privilege. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, we had a webinar where we had a dialogue around white privilege. What does it mean in a time of COVID? We're also working on an approach that looks at centering Blackness. What does it mean to be Black at UCT as a member of staff, as a student? And how do you navigate the university when you are Black? And that it means something. It means something to be Black in a historically white university, and one of the things, for example, that Black staff and students always talk about is the extent to which they feel alienated, not included. And so this is an approach that looks at that. Our anti-oppression dialogue started in 2019, where we look at how race intersects with gender, how it intersects with sexual orientation, and we have broader conversation around anti-oppression and how do we fight it as a university. And then finally, we need to recognize that racism leads to emotional trauma. And for the first time, we are actually developing an emotional trauma response to racism. And we're doing all of this through partnerships, both within UCT, with the OIC partners, with colleagues within UCT, as well as some external partnerships. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Liz to talk about teaching, the goals around teaching.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you, Loretta and Hetty. The first goal of the strategy refers to the teaching and learning issues. So what UCT is proposing is to offer what we are calling holistic innovation, future-oriented education. What does this mean, and in which ways does it differ of what it is that we are currently doing? First of all, the notion of this type of education insists on the idea that we are not just producing graduates. We are not trying to respond to the needs of the labor market or skills development in general for the country, but what we are fundamentally doing is helping educate critical thinkers. Young people are not only young people, but I mean fundamentally young people who look at the world as a space that needs to be investigated, that needs to be transformed, that needs to be engaged with. And that they have learned to feel a responsibility in terms of the world that they have inherited and the world that they themselves are going to leave as an inheritance for the future generations. So if this is what we want to achieve at a very, very macro level, what are the conditions that we need to put in place for this to happen? First, and very importantly, and this is something that we have been moving towards already, is the idea that everybody who works in teaching and learning needs to be trained. So professionally trained academic staff is very important, and it goes from the undergraduate programs to the postgraduate programs and ability to supervise. New and transformative pedagogies are based on the notion that the relationship between staff and students need to change in order to be able to educate critical thinkers and innovators, but that also the relationship between students and knowledge, and students and knowledge and the academics have to change. Curriculum, of course, becomes an essential piece in this, not only in terms of the decolonization of the curriculum, which of course it is a huge priority, but also in the manner in which we think about knowledge. What are the kind of knowledge that we need to teach, and how do we teach it, and how does this unfold in an environment that it is more and more driven by technology. And talking about technology, the next element, of course, is to have appropriate resources. Just to put a current example, right now we are very clear that we cannot have a student at UCT without a computer, without a laptop to work with. By the same token, we need to think of the importance that digitally mediated education will have in the future. What are the kinds of classrooms that we need to change the manner in which we teach, to have a much more problem-solving type approach to the education that we provide to our students, a much more engaged type of pedagogy. If we are interested in our students engaging more actively what they are going to do as graduates, developing dynamic partnership with the stakeholders would allow us to introduce some authentic learning in the workplace for all of our students. And finally is the issue of having sorry, an administrative infrastructure that can help students to walk their stay at the university from admissions to graduations in a seamless manner, that it is encouraging, that it is welcoming. The goal in the area of research is to work in such a way that the problems that the continent has are problems that we solve, and those problems have an international global projection. That's the reason why we are saying that our research contributes to solving Africa's problems that contribute to global knowledge. The COVID pandemic is a perfectly good example of that, but there are many others that fall into that. So, but one of the characteristics of research development in the times in which we live is that no single team produces research that has global repercussions. Therefore, one of the fundamental elements of this approach to research in the new strategy is the establishment of partnerships. The second element of contemporary research is the fact that most of it works across interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary spaces. So what we are looking towards in the strategy is to attract and groom researchers who are capable of working across disciplines and across disciplinary spaces, both in the country and in the rest of the world. But again, like in the case of teaching and learning, in order to do these things, we need systems that are able to support this intellectual effort. So the other element that we are looking into the strategy is to have systems for research management that enable us to monitor complex research. In the sense that we have different sources of fundings, different groups of researchers working, and all of that needs to be administered in a way that it is nimble, that it is efficient, and that it is transparent. And then is the final item in relation to the enablers is the importance of having an e-research infrastructure and research facilities that support this effort in terms of communication, in terms of accessibility to data, and in terms of having the technology and the equipment that can support the research vision. So taking all of this into account, what the research team within the Vision 2030 has come up as the massive transformative purpose for the portfolio is unleashing knowledge in and from Africa to redefine and co-create a sustainable future. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor.
Thank you very much, Les. And our goal 3 is to be a thought leader. And the idea here is that it is not enough to do outstanding, excellent work, teaching and learning and research. It is important that we create a communication platform to make teaching and learning and research, our teaching and learning and research enterprise visible and accessible to society. People should not just see it and admire it, but it should also be accessible. But for it to do that, we have to make sure that we strengthen our policies and frameworks to sustain our social engagement. That's the way to ensure that we are not an ivory tower that's inaccessible, even though it's doing excellent work. Goal number 4 is to inculcate an organizational ethos that supports new ways of thinking and being. In a way, this relates to the work that's been done in transformation and social responsiveness. And the idea here is to put in place policies, systems, and change management that supports environmental, social, and financial sustainability. And that work will happen across as well, as this is an institutional goal. But we also want to ensure a cultural change focused on redressing inequality, giving voice and agency to members of the university community and its stakeholders, particularly those who have historically felt marginalized, as DVC Ferris has explained. This is our proposed vision, and I encourage you to share your questions so that we can engage with your ideas, questions, and comments. Please feel free to write them down, and the different DVCs who are here will respond to the questions. There is no doubt that our greatest challenge will not just to get this vision approved, but it will be what happens when the UCT community runs with this vision. In a sense, what happens when the UCT community gets unleashed. How do we manage the enthusiasm and energy of a university community that's unleashed? We are a place of excellence. When you unleash excellent people, anything can happen. My view, that's a much nicer problem to deal with. The question, of course, is how do we manage the demand for more resources? Sometimes when we get unleashed, we forget that we have resources committed to do things that we are currently doing. So it's going to require all of us to have some discipline of asking ourselves as we unleash, what is it that we stop doing and what is it that we start doing to make sure that Vision 2030 happens? But we've challenged ourselves also in the executive. The DVCs, the task that they have right now is to identify key elements of Vision 2030 that can transition us into this future that we're looking forward to. And of course, this state of the world right now gives us a huge opportunity to think about those key elements that can move us forward. It's a negotiated process. It's a contestation of ideas. It's learning from others, and it's teamwork that's going to take us there. I want to pause here and ask the COO, Dr. Morar, to talk more about the operations, his portfolio, which is implicated in everything that we have said so far. But I want him to focus it even more. Reno.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. I think it's important, and I see Vision 2030 as our dream, and our dream over the next 15 to 20 years continuing. it's important to speak about that if you want to have a dream, you have to do things now already that indicate what the dream is like. And by example, the way we set up our working groups in order to develop this dream is that we decided deliberately and upfront to make sure that our teams take our people from different groups, different disciplines, the past staff and the academic staff, that the DVCs and I work together so that we can demonstrate how we can be different in thinking, being and doing. And with respect to the operations portfolio, I want to speak about 3 areas where I think we can unleash, where we can be innovative and where we can be creative. And actually for Vision 2030, we have no block on innovation and creativity. It's seeking that innovation and creativity from colleagues in the room and beyond that is going to make UCT a different place. I want to use the example of systems. People have spoken about our human resource systems, our finance systems, our student administration systems. We need to unleash the operational areas to be able to redesign, repurpose, make them better, more friendly, more efficient, and more effective. That requires everyone in this room and in our community to come on this journey with us. We have spoken about new ways of doing things, new service delivery models. For instance, can we have a service delivery model in HR and finance, research finance, that allows us to share our services and to allow academic and past staff to thrive and be different? And the last thing I want to talk about is our people. In fact, in Vision 2030, it's putting our people at the center. Our people are our greatest assets. We need to work with everybody, with our academic community, to think of creative ways, innovative models of doing things, and making sure that academic and past staff work together to create a new UCT. Working from home is just one example. We've been thrust into that by COVID. But before COVID, we were looking at piloting how we work from home. So it's advancing and innovating in that area, how we have used our electronic platforms, our digital platforms, to make our vision now real and to continue to take it forward. Thanks, Mamokgethi.
Thanks very much, Reno. Reno, I'm going to ask that perhaps you perhaps go on to talk about the next question, which I'm sure you would catch on to it because it's things that we've been discussing. So Anonymous says, the budget for 2020 and beyond are constrained based on the pandemic. How has this influenced Vision 2030 and the 4 goals? How do we then ensure that UCT is the employer of choice and the first choice for students? I'm asking Reno led the Vision 2030 task team with Liz, but of course also Reno leads a finance report to Reno, and he's part of the executive and he's been dealing with all of these issues. Reno?
I think the approach that we have in this time of crisis is never to forget that there is some new normal beyond the crisis. So critically, when we look at 2020 and 2021, I think as an executive and an academic community and past staff community, we want to name the fact that we are in a crisis, that we're managing the crisis, that we're bringing stability to 2020 and 2021. Notwithstanding managing the crisis, we must at the same time think of how we recover in 2022, 2023, and how the Vision 2030 is ensured by managing and stabilizing a crisis well, but not destroying the very fabric of what we believe in. And so I think this straddling of lives and livelihood and how the executive manages stability as well as creativity, I think is a difficult journey, but that is why we are selling and dreaming together with colleagues in the room. We can't do this alone and we have to do it together. Thanks, Mamokgethi.
I'm going to ask the DVCs to come online. I can see Loretta is there. Thank you. The next question is, it says it's from Anonymous. How has the pandemic influenced the 4 goals and Vision 2030 in ensuring that goals and vision are still achievable? Let me say, the pandemic actually did something that we needed, but we wouldn't have asked for because it's too disruptive. Those of you who were at the research in Daba at the end of of 2019 when Professor Sue Harrison hosted the Indaba and I spoke about the vision. The line that I used was that because we are such a high-performing university, it is not easy to change or to think beyond ourselves or outside of ourselves because we are so successful. And somewhat, I said, we must disrupt ourselves. In fact, the line that I used constantly until the pandemic came was disrupt thyself. Because if you don't, then you can't even reimagine yourself beyond the normal. Well, COVID-19 helped us. We didn't have to disrupt ourselves. In fact, if truth be told, after making that presentation at the Indaba, people were excited about this possibility, but there were people who were very offended, who sent emails and said, how can you talk about us disrupting ourselves? Disruption is a bad thing. And I kept saying, but disruption can be good because sometimes it helps you think about that which you wouldn't have thought of. And actually, there was even advice that said, don't talk about disrupt at all because you are really making other people uncomfortable. Well, COVID-19 threw us into disruption. We didn't even have to argue about whether we should disrupt ourselves or not because disruption was here. But the truth of the matter is our vision was that our goals were based on the idea of shaking us up. So the Vision 2030 and the Futures think tank. The Futures think tank was a group of people out of the box thinkers. It wasn't hierarchical. It was people coming from different spaces within the university and also. So the goals are consistent, actually respond COVID-19 and our goals came together. I'm going to ask Les to talk to this as well. Les?
One of the concepts that we used during the period of development of the strategy was the notion of catalysis, and I think that what has happened with the pandemic is that it had a bit of that effect. It is sort of partially it brought us into, it galvanized us into action, and on the other hand, it accelerated certain processes that sort of catapulted us into the future in a very rude way, but I mean it catapulted into the futures anyway. So let me give you a couple of examples of this. I use some examples from my portfolio, but also I will go across the other portfolios. One of the things that we propose in the actual chapter on teaching and learning in the strategy is that UCT will offer digitally mediated education across undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. Well, here we are. I mean, we might not have done this thing to 100% mark, but I mean, we are doing it, and we suddenly have been galvanized into doing this. We are finding ways of having an international footprint through online education. In the area of transformation, we have never come across in such a stark way to the impact that inequality has in the manner in which things are done, in the performance of our students, in the status of our staff, and this has been addressed across the portfolio. In research, the notion of the African problems with a global reach, the number of different groups, research groups at the institution working in relation and around the COVID problem are there. So in many respects, and even if it is us who saying this, the vision was actually visionary. So what COVID did was confirm some of the things that we had said and reaffirm the conviction in terms of what we needed to do. Same for systems, etc. So I think that that's enough, Vice-Chancellor. I'm sure that the colleagues can add to that.
I want to go on to ask DVC Ferris, and the question says, we have an optional race declaration with redress category option on registration. Government and other donors require race data. How do we continue to comply with these requirements? And it's still policy of government. Loretta?
This is a very profound question that we continue to struggle with. On the one hand, I think one can make the argument that we have this remember the underpinning principles that I talked about earlier, and one of them is return to dignity. And one can probably make the argument that being asked to classify yourself racially in a post-apartheid society actually is an implication on your dignity. It affects your dignity. I mean, personally speaking, for me, I have always rejected the label of being classified colored. I did it under apartheid. I continue to do so philosophically. And I think many other people also reject the notion of having to be labeled and having to tick a certain box. And we're seeing that because there are many staff and students increasingly that do not tick the box. And sometimes, you know, it's clear when you look at other data that this may be somebody that is actually, for example, black, but refuses to tick the box. And I think we want to make the argument that it is my right to decide what my identity is. At the same time, the other principle that we're talking about is redressing inequality. And of course, that's of course the conundrum, that in order to redress inequality, one needs to understand what it looks like, what equality looks like across racial, old historical apartheid racial classification. So in other words, for example, if we want to redress our staff profile, and we want to right-size it, and we want to have a staff profile that reflects the diversity of the South African population, then we need people to actually tick that box. And the same with donors. You know, that if they want to provide funding to redress inequality, they need to know where it's going to in terms of the old apartheid classification. So I think we're living the conundrum when it comes to transformation at UCT, and we must accept it and we must acknowledge it, that there's a deep discomfort with it, but at the same time we need to comply. You know, Department of Higher Education requires us to provide that data. Department of Labor requires us to provide that data, and to some respect it benefits us to have the data. But here's the thing: we should have these conversations, you know, and the anti-oppression dialogues, for example, it's a very good space to have these conversations, to reflect on it, to reflect on its meaning, and that's really what we're inviting you to do. Thanks, Vicky.
Thanks, Loretta. Loretta, the next question also talks to transformation, and it says. Many thanks for engaging meeting. It has been boldly declared that the underpinning goals of social responsiveness and transformation need to be visible in the core functions of teaching, learning, and research. How will the DVC portfolios and leadership work together to ensure that they are visible and that they get the support and funding needed to be sustainable and visible over the long term? This question is very key. And it's not only key, by the way, for social responsiveness and transformation. It's key for everything that we do, that the core functions have to work together. The days of having the DVCs not talking to one another, each one doing their own things, are gone. The DVCs have started working together. They work individually together. But so the days of having that everyone clamors for resources just for them, for their portfolio, doesn't care about what happens to other portfolios as long as mine is fine, are over. If we do that, we will sink the whole university. It will not benefit that portfolio and it will not benefit the university. And I can say to you right now that this working together has started. Of course, for social responsiveness, the big issue is how do you recognize the work of social responsiveness and transformation as it happens across? All right, that when you, and I refer to ad hominems, and I said all faculties have a separate criteria for ad hominem, and then they have something for teaching and learning, and then for research. And of course, some colleagues say, well, but why is it a standalone? You said these things are integrated. My teaching, this is how my teaching responds to social responsiveness. And so we're going to have to ask ourselves uncomfortable questions about that, but also about how we resource these areas in a way that shows that they are integrated. Not in a way that says, I have always gotten less, please give me more. But in a way that says, we've actually reimagined, and we can see this to show this integration. We don't necessarily have to do something separate. We can repurpose some of the capacity that we have, reuse it differently, and to do this. And we can, then we need extra resources, but maybe not to the same level because we want to do this other big thing. It requires thinking. I don't think it's something that we sit here and say, so you must create a new wing and a new building and a new office and a new whatever. But it's about how do we rethink the whole thing. So we can't think of social responsiveness separate from transformation, separate from teaching and learning, separate from research. But I want to hand over to Loretta.
Thanks, Kate. Yes, I'm not going to add much more to that. I think that the point is made is that it is about how do we think jointly, and we do that practically. We all meet with each other once a month, and we discuss what are the cross-cutting issues in our portfolio. So we're already doing that. And it's about going forward to focus on how do we integrate our portfolios on a daily basis. Thanks, Kate.
The next question is about Unleash, and it's asking, with the automation of most processes, how do staff continue with the journey within UCT if automation reduces the need for people in the new processes? And I want to start with a comment that says, by the way, automation, AI, is not just a threat. It's a huge opportunity. My view is that as we have these conversations, my hope is that labor, not only at institutional level, at national and international level, is thinking about the future. And the question for labor is, who owns labor for the future? Is it possible that things could change in the way labor movements work, in which workers see themselves? Is it possible that we might see a different model? And labor could actually do this way before we do. So it's not only automation, it's that this situation creates more opportunities for institutions, individuals, and organizations. Reno.
Mamokgethi, you've already spoken about the art of possibilities, and I think that's the issue. That for the question is challenging, yet it presents the opportunity. So the assumption that automation necessarily will take away people is not one that one should just automatically make, if I can put it that way. There are different ways of doing jobs. There are different ways of segmentation. There are different ways of working. There are different models. I prefer to see this as an opportunity to do things differently rather than stay with the old model. Because part of doing things differently is to make sure that this institution, this university, and other organizations outside remain socially sustainable 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, so that we can continue delivering on its core mandate. So I think the art of possibilities is really the theme that we want to share with the colleagues in the room.
Reno, whilst you are on the stage, can I ask you to answer the question, is the university open to allowing staff to work from home indefinitely?
So that's exactly the art of possibilities. The university is open to having staff work from home. I think the wonderful opportunity with colleagues in the room and beyond is to change our ethos and ask ourselves, how do we manage us together and deliver on outputs and outcomes and not only inputs 8 to 5? That requires whole-scale change management, and we are actively working on a work-from-home policy. I think we can reimagine how the university works. We also have to recognize that not everybody has the opportunity to work from home, so we need to be creative with staff who need to come in, but also creative with staff who don't actually need to come in every day, some not for quite a while. but some of the research is also showing that to maintain social cohesion and social sustainability within an organization, you do need a level of engagement. And that is a different way of engaging electronically and face-to-face. So the answer is yes. I think let's get models that make us different.
I want to go to the next question. I want to give Reno a little break and go to Loretta. How does sports at the university and its contribution to holistic wellness fit into Vision 2030?
Thanks, Katie. So my instinctive reaction is to almost throw this back to the person who asked the question and say, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to ask each department to do the cascading within your department, to do the dreaming within your department. And of course, in our sports section of the student affairs, we are best suited to actually think about how can sports contribute. And I would really like to look to see what comes out of that conversation. Personally, I think that as our students who are driving sports at UCT, and I've given them this challenge before, is to think about how do we engage broader with community? How do we use sports to actually engage our community and bring our skills that we have at the university? How do we bring it into the community? How do we invite people through sports onto UCT campus? I think there's ways of doing it. I think there's lots of possibilities in how we use sports in a post-COVID context.
Thanks, Loretta. And just to add, say we continue to have conversations with different sporting codes. They are always interesting conversations because let's face it, the visibility of sporting codes at UCT is uneven. Some sporting codes are much more visible than others. And I challenged one sporting code to say, why is it that way? And the reason it's in that way is because of the people who are involved from outside the university. The members of the university community, the alumni, whatever. How people from outside come into the university, as Loretta is saying, how we invite them, they come in, but they become a resource to make the work, the sports much more visible in the university. But why do we need sports visible in the university? It is important for social cohesion. It is key for social cohesion. You just have to go there when the Ikees play. I had never been to a rugby match until 2019, and it's fascinating what happens. That what you see, and the energy and how it brings together. Can we have the same thing with soccer? Can we have the same thing with netball? Can we have the same thing? I went to the hockey match. It's different, and the question is, why is it that way? And that nobody gets forced to go to the Ikees, but it's that way. So these, for me, are important questions to engage. Some people say, well, give us the money and the problem will be solved. No. Investment follows vision. And you've got to recruit investment also from the resources that we have. I don't necessarily want every sporting code to be like rugby, but we want them to reimagine the sporting code and how it contributes to Vision 2030. Beyond COVID. I want to go to the next question, and that's for Reno. Reno, this is a provocative question, and it says, in the current pandemic, UCT unfortunately does not demonstrate much flexibility in high performance, but rather focuses on creating additional red tape. I'm going to you because as an institution, I thought you would come with three things. As an institution, the question says, we are months behind to where we should be. This causes massive pain to staff and postgraduate students. How are you planning to elevate this frustration that we are actually unleashed? And this is, of course, an overdue question. And here's the thing. Coming to UCT, I was surprised at the amount of paper that executives still use pen and a book to write. Because I stopped writing 10 years ago. We only type, I use a phone, you use a laptop. And so we are way behind, but there are steps in place already, led by the COO, some led by the registrar, to make sure that our students don't run around with a piece of paper, but also to make sure that executives join in the paperless and bookless world that some of us have been living in for the past 10 years. Reno.
Thanks, Mamokgethi. I just wanted to refer and acknowledge the issue of stress, frustration in the context of COVID. I think individually, myself personally, when I look at how as a nation we've tried to balance this thing of lives and livelihood, lives in terms of the health and safety protocols, and livelihood in unlocking our economies and our academic project, it has been a cause of frustration, and that needs to be acknowledged. From an executive point of view and how we've managed it, it was never our intention to frustrate. And I think that's where I think our thrust should be. It's not our intention to frustrate, but where we have done so and where we need to unlock that as soon as possible and reduce the levels of frustration and anxiety and angst, we need to commit to do so over a very quick period of time, but yet in a phased manner. And I think there are lessons to be learned from how we managed the pandemic from March until now. I think in lockdown level 2 and moving to lockdown level 1, we want to acknowledge those lessons and make sure we don't repeat them. So as far as that is concerned, I do want to give that commitment that part of unlocking now and part of unlocking in the future must not be seen as an intention to frustrate, but an intention to try and balance things. And sometimes we don't get that balance right. I think acknowledging as an executive that we don't get the balance right is the first port of call. And then secondly, working with our colleagues in the room to unlock those is the next step. Thanks, Mamokgethi.
I'm going to go to Liz. There's a question that says, in recent months, we have observed an increasing tendency for discussions and decision-making at UCT to run up and down increasingly lengthy hierarchical lines, slowing us down. Would unleashing not require shorter lines of communication and more freedom for individual agency? Liz?
Thank you very much. Look, I mean, I think that the management of a crisis of the proportion of the COVID pandemic should not be used as an indication of how the unfolding of the strategy should take place from a management point of view. I am sure that we have centralized many more decisions than we would have otherwise done. I am sure that in the process of centralizing things and consulting and etc., we might have taken longer, and it might have felt really red tape-ish and hierarchical. On the other hand, thanks to doing some of the things that we have done, we have managed to establish some levels of consistency and coherence across faculties, which is, I might say, not one of the characteristics of UCT, and it is very confusing for students. But I mean, I'm sure that there have been problems, but I would really love to think that people have the impression that this is the way in which we are going to deal with the university into the future. What I think the strategy opens up, and this is a conversation that the Vice-Chancellor initiated at the beginning of this year. Unfortunately, we couldn't manage it because of the pandemic. But the plan for the HOD workshop, for example, this year, was to talk about the ways and models of management. What is the model of management that the implementation of Vision 2030 requires? And this is work that we have started doing at executive level. And this is a conversation that university requires. There are very many signs that we need to review some of the manners in which we do things, because they are inefficient and because they are very costly. And how do we do that, balancing it with individual freedom and innovation and capacity to decide and nimbleness is the million-dollar question. So I take the issue. I understand that this is the way in which it feels now, but I think that it is part of what we are proposing to revise this in a more productive way. I hope that that's enough questions.
Yes, and let's deal with this question that says, I'm interested in the extent to which we can take an integrated, interconnected view of what we traditionally see separately. So how do we see Vision 2030 as enabling research, teaching, and learning and social responsiveness transformation to be interlinked and boundary blurring? And I think this is the big thing that we will need to do. I mean, there's a suggestion here as much as there's a question. Liz?
With all these things, there is always the limits and the possibilities. But I mean, let me talk about this in a different perspective. I think that what has happened, certainly in terms of going online for teaching, just to keep one example that I can manage well, has in many respects decentered the identity of the academics. Academics are not any longer in the classroom, they are not at the center of it. The relationship with the students is more mediated, but also every hour that people have put of online instruction has taken them many more hours of preparation than what they used to do. So if there is one identity of academics that it is currently sort of shaking and saying, what about me, is the research side of it. So how we rebalance this thing? How we rethink the identity of academics in particular in the post-COVID environment? Now, in terms of the integration of things, I think that it is that the work that we have been doing in putting together the strategy has given us the opportunity of conceptualizing this thing from the very beginning as cross-cutting. I mean, what Loretta is talking about in terms of transformation is hugely important, because then the measure of transformation is not something that happens in transformation, it's what you do in research, what you do in teaching and learning. And again, I would like to argue in terms of social responsiveness. I mean, I fully agree with the Vice-Chancellor that social responsiveness is not actually a circle function of a university. Social responsiveness is a role that the university has to play in relation to its actual co-functions. And this, what happens is that we need to find the appropriate mechanisms to make this real. And in doing this, at the same time, we need to accept that there are different roles, interests, and functionalities at the university, and that many of these things have to be respected. But I think that we are working towards the integration, but it's going to take us a while to figure out the concept and the practices in terms of the systems and policies that can make this thing real.
May I contribute to Liz, the question Liz has just answered? I think it's a great positioning that Liz has given us. And I think that one of the things which is really important is to look within UCT, for those nodes of that have managed to achieve these integrations in very limited areas over the time that currently. So there are places where we see great links between research and teaching, and or between teaching and social responsiveness. We do have some great examples, and we can go and look at methodologies that have been used here to enable us to pull those out and work with them even further across the university. So while we are positioning a very new and different Vision 2030, we are going to learn a lot from what we've already done. And way back in the conversation earlier on the question which talked about the pandemic and how it may impact our goals, I actually think this pandemic has really helped us to understand how we can realize our goals. And if you look at some of the ways, if I talk about in my portfolio, some of the ways in which research has been pivoted based on things we know how to do to be able to meet the new challenges, that's exactly what we want to be able to do in Vision 2030. And we already demonstrated through the pandemic places where we can do this really, really well. So I think that's exciting for our future. It's not that we're trying to do something that we don't know how to do. We've just got to be brave enough to do it.
So I'm going to ask that whilst your network is still cooperative, let's let's capitalize on this and ask you the question that came through. It says, how are we going to reconcile the African focus in our research with global contribution to knowledge? How is this going to influence our publications and citations if the world starts feeling that our knowledge is limited to African challenges?
Thanks, Katie, and thanks for that question. It's a great one. I think our job in how we position the questions that we're dealing with in our research space are to be absolutely sure that we are contributing to knowledge which we need in this country and on this continent. But much of how we address issues will find relevance in the global north. And one of the things we tend to do is to take the standpoint of the global north for how to frame the research questions. What we're saying is, let's deal with big global questions. Let's deal with them in a way that will generate that knowledge which is relevant throughout, but will also deal with the kind of environment we find in a more developing environment. And that's going to be so critical to globally moving forward that we'll find great relevance of our work. So yes, we will increase our knowledge that's very relevant to Africa, but I don't think that we need to lose our space in global publication, global output by doing this, provided we tailor our questions correctly. The question's about how to do both, not one or the other.
Thanks, Sue. The issue is to see Africa as part of the world, that Africa is not separate from the world, that the problems of Africa are also problems of the world. I mean, some of them manifest in a different way because of the context. So the knowledge that we generate here is very relevant to the world. So I don't want us to have a situation in the university where we say, now this corner is for African problems and this corner is for global problems. The local is global, whether it's poverty or inequality or infectious diseases. Our infectious diseases scholars in this university are top in the world, particularly because they do their work. They are located here. Is an advantage that they're located here, and we are who we are, and the challenges that we have, and they deal with them, make a contribution to the world. So I think Professor Harrison is right. It doesn't mean a trade-off that you're going to choose one or the other, but it requires actually a change in worldview. That there isn't like the Africa world and the global world, and that you choose one or the other. I want to ask Liz the next question. Can the executive set up a forum, Liz? IPD reports to you, and we're going to be setting up ways of assessing how we're doing with the vision. But the question is, can we set up a forum for feedback from staff and students as to what is working and what's not, so that these visions from the university community can be integrated into executive. So first is a question about the feedback now, but what I'm hearing is also a question about the forums as we keep going. So it's now we have over to you, Les.
Thank you very much. I believe that CMD is working on creating a website for Vision 2030. And that the part of the website is precisely the ability to comment and to engage directly with it. So I think that is a very good initiative. I think that as we start implementation, we are going to need to start finding different fora to precisely to bring in the opinion of staff and what it is that they want to do. And how they feel about it. So, I mean, the idea of participation is very important. I think that we all agree that this strategy is a live document. So this is not something that we put in the drawer and we put up, we dust off in order to report to Council or to the Department of Education. This is ours. From this level, it has to cascade down and be made your own at every unit at the university. And so we need to talk about it and keep on talking about it. So by all means, yes. I'm told that the site is at http://vision2030.uct.ac.za. So there you have the advertisement. So I think that's that, Vice Chancellor.
Thanks very much, Liz. Loretta, I'm going to go to a question. It's a follow-up question on the transformation question on race earlier. And the colleague says UCT currently loses about 20 million rands in related funding for not having race data. Students don't seem to have an issue with disclosing this data. We should relook our policy. And I just want your brief comments. I think you gave a brilliant response. And there's I like the way you chunked it from how you see this and to your responsibility in this. So the colleague is challenging us about relooking the policy, but the colleague is also making an assumption that students don't have a problem. Let me just say, students also have a choice to choose whether they want to declare their race or not. And the number of students who are not declaring their race is growing, all right? So I don't want us to make assumptions. In the same way, and this is a political question as much as it is pragmatic and impact on our finances. But it's also a question about privilege. I often ask, and I'm sure we will engage with this through the leadership of Professor Ferris, right? Who has got the luxury not to declare? And who doesn't declare? When is it comfortable for me to declare and say my race is irrelevant? And when is it not? All right? And it is inevitably linked to when social goods are on offer. So if it gives you access to social goods, whether that social good is extra research funding, promotion, entry to business class or whatever, then people are, if it doesn't do that, if it's not attached to social goods, people are not necessarily so keen. But this is just a question that we need to grapple with. And I think these questions we're going to grapple with, these are apartheid racial categorizations that are very problematic. We do them for a reason. If we don't, we end up hurting ourselves, because then we can see we've got so few people from designated groups in our ranks as time goes on. Do we need to do them for money, change policy for money, or only do it, And I want Loretta to think to maybe venture into this, furthering the response that you gave earlier, Loretta.
Yeah, so I must admit that I'm not quite clear what the colleague is getting at, because I seem to read it a little bit differently, in that the colleague is saying currently it's an option for students to tick the box. And we must change the policy. And I'm wondering whether the colleague is saying we should make it mandatory. And I think that's exactly the issue. That is what the Vice-Chancellor has also now made the point about, is that people is grappling with this. This is not just a straightforward, oh yeah, I'm white, so I'm ticking the box, or I'm black and I'm ticking the box. Grapple with it from a political point of view, from a philosophic point of view, from an emotional point of view, but actually sometimes from a pragmatic point of view. So if your father is Chinese and your mother is African black, which box do you tick? So I think it's not always that easy. But I also want to say this. I'm not quite sure about the 20 million that we're losing, because we do have proxy for race. And that's what we introduced with the admissions, with the new admissions policy, is exactly to kind of move away from these very overt race-based policies to looking at social conditions. And we know that social conditions are linked to race. But that also gives us an opportunity to use proxies for race instead of the kind of crude racial data only, and so that does allow us, at least with students, it's a bit more complex with staff, but at least with students there are proxies, and that's what the admissions office, that's what IPD is using when it tries to submit data around race. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks, Loretta. And the proxies also avoid the student. They ask about their background. And then we can track when they get to postgrad. At some stage, we see that the number of students who actually don't declare it grows. And we also see that it's not always just white students who don't declare. Black African students also choose not to declare. It's a very interesting thing. So it's not just that. I want to go to Reno. Reno, it says, what kind of training and relearning will be available to past staff to assist in putting strategic plans in place to focus on Vision 2030?
Thanks, Mamokgethi. I want to answer that from two different perspectives. The first perspective is asking ourselves, what have we as an executive and team put in place to facilitate new ways of doing things, to work on strategic plans and focus on Vision 2030? Just as a reminder, through your initiative, Mamokgethi, the Future Catalyst colleagues that are available to catalyze relearning, retraining in the way we do things. And secondly, also on how Sue in her portfolio have made a research call that encourages past and academic staff to work together on issues of sustainability and environmental sustainability. So that's one perspective of how we assist staff to relearn and train. The other perspective is I want to ask colleagues in the room to make the following assumptions and then talk specifically about training and relearning. So if we're on a journey together, could we agree and share the fact that we are going to do things differently in terms of service models, past and academic staff? Secondly, that we'll put in place different systems and improve our systems. And if we agree on that, it means then that training and relearning becomes part of a new way of doing it because of a new service model and a new set of systems. However, even if you digitized a new way of doing, but if we have slow decision-making processes, if we don't manage by output instead of input, we will not be successful. And I think it's this journey of retraining ourselves as managers and executives and supervisors, as well as offering training and learning for staff within their teams. And this training has to be both one on a talent basis and on an individual basis. Secondly, it's got to be training and on a team basis. And thirdly, working with Loretta, it's got to be training that deals with organizational culture and ethos. And only if we align all three of those will we truly be able to put strategic plans in place to realize Vision 2030. Thank you.
Just to correct the misperception so that we don't get inappropriate approaches. The Sustainable Campus call is an institutional call. It's not a research call. It's led from the VC's office, managed by the DVC Research. And it's not just about environmental, it's about sustainability. So financial, environmental, and social. And it's the first project, initiative that we have that has to have past students and academics together. It's got to show that this diversity that we're talking about in all its forms. So it's good that you mentioned it, Rena. I just thought to be explicit there. Otherwise, we will be held to the tape recording.
Oh no, I actually meant not to add environmental, just sustainability. My apologies, Vice-Chancellor.
All right, Liz, I would like you to add to the debate that we had earlier, but I also want you to answer to, because we're running out of time. I want you to answer to the two questions that came that I think you'd be better positioned given your portfolio. And one is, I think it's one question. It says the intention to have a new UCT vision is there an intention to have a new UCT vision every 5 to 10 years? And the answer is no. If so, has the impact on market perceptions been considered, especially if they are vastly varied? no, but the nature of the vision, Liz will talk about why the approach that we're taking. I'm just making sure, Liz, that I'm not leaving anything out. And then you also contribute to the earlier question about declaring race and gender.
Thank you, Hetty. I'll leave it in relation to the other question. I think that this is a very interesting question. Definitely the short answer is no. But I mean, the long and elaborate answer is I think the following. God forbid we have to go through this process every 5 years, but I mean, that's a flippant part. What sadly in higher education, strategies tend to be linked to the period in office of vice-chancellors. So this strategy, to start with, is a fundamentally act of optimism in terms of the vision that it is proposed, that it is there to stay. My personal view, and I think that the colleagues agree with this, is that the change that this strategy is asking UCT to make is sufficiently large for this to be a work of a couple of decades. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, in the times in which we live, planning for too long. That's the reason why strategic planning is, in a sense, is falling into disuse, if you want to. It could be a bit of a sort of exercise in futurology. But definitely this is the direction, and we are hoping that by 2030, the direction would be sufficiently understood and embedded into the DNA of the university in such a way that whoever takes the torch from us, I mean, those of us who are behind, I mean, I'm going to leave much sooner than that, are actually follow through in the same direction. So the university is unleashed in order to be unleashed for the next 3 decades, and the market will have to deal with it, and us with the market.
I think, Liz, you put it very well, because the unleashing is also part of the calling for agility, calling to the institution not to relax in our success, but to be agile as the world changes. Well, colleagues, let me just check if the COO, do you have anything to say before I close the meeting? I'm not taking any more questions because I see that we are run out of time.
I just want to reiterate that there's no limits to innovation, creativity, and unleashing. And certainly our job as an executive is to unlock and not frustrate in realizing the Vision 2030 and how we work currently. Thanks, Mamokgethi.
Any final remarks?
I'd like to thank the faculty, the grouping here, for some wonderful questions, and to say that we really do plan to have interactive sessions across the university in groups as it comes up, to further develop our vision and things we'd want to do. And I think we've seen, you know, Hetty referred earlier on to our research symposium last year, where we began to talk about this in the research space, but we'll need to do it in many different spaces and bringing them together. And that's going to be the really interesting space of how we all live this vision together as a university. It can't just be the vision of the executive. We need to see that that it becomes a vision of the university, and that we tailor it so that all members of the university feel ownership for it. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Loretta.
Thanks, Hetty. So from my side also, thank you very much. I thought it was a really interesting session, and thanks for all the questions. And just a reminder that this is in some sense also an invitation. It's an invitation to engage with the vision, to think through the vision, to go and visit the website and think through what is being proposed. And then to think within your own space, what does that mean for your department? What does it mean for your faculty? And more importantly, how do we contribute? How do each one of you contribute to that? I mean, I'm really excited to see what are the ideas that's coming from colleagues in the different spaces, and I look forward to engaging with those. Thank you.
All right. Colleagues, thank you very much for joining us today. Special thanks to the team that led the task team of Vision 2030 task team, Reno and Liz. Thank you to the Futures think tank that went in and did all that thinking before laying the ground. And all the best to Futures Think Tank 2.0, again, led by Professor Alison Lewis, but also thank you to the entire executive for working together on this and the engagements that we've had with the university that continue to shape, I mean, all the feedback that we're getting, colleagues who send us email and challenge us, why are you saying it this way? Why is that? You've helped us think. And we've tweaked some of the things because of the feedback that we got from you. So thank you so much for your contribution and everything that you have contributed. Staff who the DVCs engaged with or the COO engaged with, and all of the contribution. And thank you to the ICTS team, super team, as well as the CMD team for the amazing work that you do with these sessions to make sure that they proceed smoothly. Thank you.